Welcome back to another Sketch Starters with Nicole. This time I'll create a pile of flowers to create a pile of cards based on some previous sketches. So let's get started with some paper and ink. All of today's projects will use the Wild and Flowers stamp set and all of those dies that come with it. I'm going to use every flower, so I have them all set up on my MISTI here, and I'm using the permanent black ink because I know I'm going to be using my artist markers to color with, and the only way to make sure that I don't get any kind of smearing is to use the permanent black. Obsidian black really won't work for this application, so it's important to know what you're going to be doing with your images before you start inking up the outline. So I've got those ready to go and they are getting stamped for the first time. Now, sometimes I notice with my permanent black that I need to stamp it twice, and that's okay. That's why we've got something like our stamp positioner tool to make sure that we can get a really good impression. So I'll simply ink that up for a second time and we'll get a good impression and be able to move on with our coloring. Having all of your images stamped out and ready to color is a really great way to spend a weekend. So you can ink up all of these images and just start coloring them and have a good time doing it. Turn on some TV or some of your favorite music or even a podcast and just sit back and relax and have a fun time coloring. So I'm starting off with all of the leaves in this set, and I'm doing this with the tropical forest colors. So I decided that I was going to go from light to dark because these are pretty small images. So I'm starting off with bamboo and moving into parrot and then going into olive, and really not doing the moss color at all. It's just a little bit too dark for these small images. You'll also notice that I'm using the bullet nib a lot, and that's because these are such small images that they really don't need to be colored in with the brush. Now that I'm moving into some of the larger images, I'll use the brush nib because I can get a better flick stroke that really will help to have those colors blend together. So I finished all of my leaves and I'm moving into the oranges, and these are from the Warm and Cozy set. So again, I'm starting with the lighter shades and then I'll move into the darker shades. And using the brush nib on this one allows me to fill in all of that color much more quickly and get me a nice even blend on the ink there. So I started with the lightest shade, which is Orange Cream, and then I moved into Sunkissed. And now I can do just those nice little flicky strokes. And you can see that I'm going from a flick on the outside as well. So every time one of these flowers has a little indent in its petal, I'm putting a flick stroke there in a darker shade. And that actually helps to create a little bit of a crease in your flower and make it look much more lifelike. So every time you see one of those little bends in the edge of a petal, go ahead and put a little flick stroke in there to help make it look like there's a little bit of a crease in there. So I came back in with the Fire Brick. Actually, I came back in with the Autumn Blaze and then finished that up with Fire Brick. So I've got that first flower there done, and I'm going to go back through and pick 2 or 3 more flowers that I'm going to turn into a beautiful orange shade. And you can see here, sometimes I'm starting lightest to darkest, sometimes I'm going darkest to light. In this case, I'm doing darkest to light because I want to keep this flower a little bit more light in color. So I don't want to have a whole bunch of layers of the alcohol marker on it. Every time you add a layer of color, you're truly darkening that particular shade. So if you keep adding layer over layer over layer, it's just going to keep getting darker and darker and darker, and it's really not going to look good. So if you want something light, start off with your darker markers in the centers and where the shadows are going to be, and then work out to your lighter shades. This will keep you from adding too many layers. All right, so I've got all of my oranges done, and now I'm going to move on to the reds, and I'm using the Red Sunset marker set for this. And for this cute little flower here, I decided I wanted it to be super light. So I'm going to avoid the darker colors almost completely. So I'm starting with blush, and then I'm going to do just the tiniest bit of rouge for a little bit of a shadow in there. I will come back with Crimson and Velvet just to give them a hair more depth It really just needed a little bit of something. Even though I want this to be a super light flower, it really does need to have depth. So adding in just the tiniest bit of those darker shades really does help a lot. And that's where the bullet nib really comes in handy for such small images. So for these final layers of shadowing, I'm using the bullet nib exclusively. When I move into another small flower, again, I'll go for the bullet nib instead of the brush nib, just because I have more control. I can make sure that I stay inside the lines and I can get some really fine, petite flick strokes just on the insides there without going too crazy with it. And this particular flower, I'll even go for just the teeny tiniest little flick on the ends there. And that really helps just kind of perk up that flower a little bit. For my final color set, I'm using the Glacier Caves blue set, and I did some really stunning flowers with this. So these I completely colored in with Arctic, and I'm actually going to go over this one twice. So it's going to give it an even darker hue of Arctic, but it's also going to really saturate the paper with the blending fluid. And what happens when it's really saturated is that the inks that you put over it are going to start to move even faster. So all of the blues that I add in on top of this, starting with the Caribbean sky, they just really start to push out and blend out really fast. So this was a calculated move on my part. I wanted to get something really flowy in here, so I added a whole bunch of that Arctic to begin with to really get the ink to push out fast. Again, I come back with the bullet nib just to get in the tiniest bit of the darkest shade of blue, which in this case was sapphire. All right, I have everything all colored and die cut out, and now I'm ready to start working on some projects with all of those beautiful flowers. So I have the Altenew Celebrate 6x6 paper, and this one is cut down to 4 by 5 1/4. And I'm going to add some gold ink spray on it using the antique gold, and I'm going to use a brush. I like to use a brush because I get a little bit more control from that versus trying to use the little wand on the inside of the bottle. So I just spray a little bit here and then decide that I need a little bit more. So I'll go back into the bottle and add some more. Now I've got everything all complete and ready to go. So now it's time to work on some arrangements, and this is where the sketches come into play. So I pulled out an old sketch. This is sketch number 6 from earlier this year. And you can see here that it's got 2 circles with a sentiment strip. And I thought at first that maybe I would go for a larger and a smaller flower, but it really just needed 2 flowers that were about the same size. So I went for 2 larger flowers, and then started to decide how I was going to arrange everything. These will also need a few bits of greenery to really bring everything to life. So I added a little bit of liquid adhesive to the orange flower in the background, and I just put it in the center so I could manipulate it and move it around a little bit. It's not going to dry hard onto the cardstock right away, so I do have a little bit of wiggle room to move that one around a little bit. On the blue flower, I put a adhesive foam piece and just left the backing on it so I can move that one around freely as well while I try to figure out where all of my leaves are going to go. So even though I'm only working with 2 flowers here, I still want to have an angled kind of triangular pattern. And you can see in the sketch that it kind of hints at a triangle, or at least a nice angled look. So I fiddled around with the leaves, and you can see that took probably the longest for me to figure out exactly where all those were going to go. And I even had to move that orange flower a little bit. So now I've got everything where I think I want it to go, so I'll start gluing things into place. So first I'll add in that back leaf, and then I will curl up the flower petals with my fingers here. And that was just a nice unintended thing. When I realized that I didn't have the whole thing glued down, I could give it a little bit more dimension by just finger curling those petals, and that really gave it a nice look. So then I glued these 2 flowers together next and put a little bit of adhesive on them to attach them to that blue flower. So those are going to become a single unit. And the next thing I'll do here is put a foam adhesive on it. And you can see that I've put it over both the flower and the leaves, and that just makes sure that both of those are going to stay together while I finish my arranging. So before I commit to anything else, I'm going to put my sentiment strip in place and then figure out where I want everything to go in its last positioning. So I know that that sentiment strip is going to go across that flower because the sketch has told me that that's where it should go. So then I really fiddle around with that final leaf and decide, oh, it really does need to go on the top here. So I'll put it in its little floating position, and when I put the other flower over it, it's going to be in just the perfect place. So I'll put these final bits in place here, and this first card will be complete. For our second project, I'm going to use yet another piece of cardstock from the Celebrate 6x6 paper pack, and I did add some antique gold spatter to this one as well. So that piece is all ready to go, and it is set to 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. And I have my sentiment already set up in my MISTI. I've been using this piece of extra plastic that I have to keep my sentiment from going wonky. So I stamp it first on the piece of plastic and then make sure that it's going to be square on the cardstock before I commit to stamping it. So once I've decided that's in the right place, I can go ahead and stamp my sentiment and know that it's going to be square every time. So now that I've got that in place, I can decide on all of my finishing elements. This card actually comes together pretty quick. It's actually sketch number 8, and it has just those 3 little elements with a line through them. Now, I kind of avoided the line because there was already the sentiment in place. So I'm going to just add this to a card base and add 3 little flowers. And I thought this would be perfect for those itty bitty teeny tiny flowers that come in the Wild and Free stamp set. So there they are, and I just have to put them in place right underneath, just 1, 2, 3. It's kind of an interesting placement, but I think it really works. It's not something I would have thought of without having looked at this sketch first, and once I put them down, I decided that it was really a cute look. It's very clean and simple and quick, and it's a great way to use up these teeny tiny flowers if you don't have any other plans for them. So I'm just going to glue them down in place, and this ends up being almost like a 1-layer card because the sentiment is stamped right onto the base there, and those flowers just go straight underneath. So there we go. I've got 2 cards done. So that did not take up all of the flowers that I created, and I figured I could create some more. On my way out, I'm going to show you 3 other cards that I created using the rest of the flowers. It really turned into a beautiful cohesive set using 5 of the sketches that I've shared with you so far this year. If you love these projects, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up. Thank you so much for joining me, and until next time, happy crafting.
Hello crafters, I hope you enjoyed that video. If you want to see more, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss anything. Thanks for watching!